The U.S. auto industry is in crisis, not a slowdown, not a market correction, a full-scale crisis, one that could cripple American manufacturing, push car prices through the roof, and force thousands of job cuts. And it all started with China's latest counterpunch in the trade war. China just banned critical U.S. auto exports. The world's largest car market is shutting out American automakers. And this isn't just about tariffs. It's a strategic shift, one that could permanently lock U.S. companies out of China and accelerate the rise of Chinese automakers like BYD and NIO. So what does this mean for Ford, GM, Tesla? And more importantly, what does it mean for you, the consumer? Buckle up, because we're about to break it all down. When Donald Trump launched his trade war against China in 2018, his goal was simple: make America stronger, bring back jobs, reduce dependency on China. But what happened? China didn't back down. It fought back with tariffs, supply chain moves, and now a full-scale blockade on key American auto exports. Let's look at the numbers. Before the trade war, U.S. automakers sold over 275,000 cars per year in China. After China's first wave of retaliatory tariffs, that number plummeted by nearly 50%. Now, with China's latest move, American automakers could be permanently cut off from the world's largest auto market. This isn't just retaliation. It's a redesign of the global auto landscape, one that might leave American manufacturers on the outside looking in. And that brings us to the real question: can the U.S. auto industry survive this? For decades, the U.S. led the global auto industry. Ford, GM, Chrysler. These were the names that defined car manufacturing. But China has been quietly building its own empire. And now, the tables are turning. In 2023, China surpassed Japan as the world's largest car exporter. BYD overtook Tesla in Q4 2023 as the world's largest EV seller. And now, with new tariffs hitting U.S. automakers, China is cementing its dominance and reshaping global trade in the process. With U.S. brands losing market share in China, Chinese automakers are expanding their reach in Europe, Latin America, and even the U.S. itself. So, where does this leave Detroit? Let's break it down. Right now, China is the single biggest auto market on the planet, accounting for over 30% of global car sales. But with new tariffs and supply chain restrictions, American brands are getting squeezed out. Ford's market share in China shrinking. GM's sales in China falling every year since 2018. Tesla facing new regulatory barriers from Beijing. Meanwhile, Chinese brands are thriving not just at home, but globally. The bottom line: U.S. automakers are facing a long uphill battle. And without China, they may never regain their former dominance, which leads us to a bigger question: did the U.S. miscalculate? Let's be clear, Trump's trade war wasn't random. The idea was to bring back U.S. manufacturing, weaken China's hold on key industries, and protect American jobs. But did it backfire? Because here's what actually happened. Instead of weakening China, it accelerated its rise in EVs and battery production. Instead of bringing jobs back, it raised costs for American manufacturers. And instead of stopping China's influence, it pushed Beijing to double down on global expansion. So, was this an oversight, or was it a calculated move? One that expected short-term pain for long-term gain. One thing is certain: the impact is hitting American consumers hard. Steel is the backbone of every vehicle on the road. And when tariffs hit, costs don't just rise at the factory, they trickle down to the dealership and ultimately the consumer with the latest tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum. American automakers are facing higher production costs at a time when supply chains are already strained. This isn't just about raw materials. Everything from chassis frames to engine components will see price hikes, forcing manufacturers to either eat the cost or pass it on to buyers. And history shows what happens when steel tariffs are imposed. In 2018, similar duties drove domestic steel prices up by 25%, forcing auto manufacturers to increase prices across the board. For consumers, this means higher sticker prices and more expensive monthly payments as rising material costs collide with already sky-high interest rates on car loans. The average price of a new car in the U.S. is nearing record highs, and with automakers now paying a premium for steel, that number could keep climbing. Even used cars aren't immune with fewer new vehicles being produced. Demand for pre-owned models has surged, pushing prices up across the board. This isn't just inflation. It's a structural shift in pricing, where every added tariff locks in a higher cost floor for the industry, making affordable cars a thing of the past for millions of Americans. With supply chains squeezed and tariffs stacking up, the average American buyer is facing a brutal reality. Cars are about to get even more expensive. The average new car price in the U.S. is already hovering near $48,000. And industry analysts warn that with higher steel costs, rising labor expenses, and supply chain constraints, that number could break $55,000 by 2025. Financing isn't offering any relief either. Auto loan interest rates have hit a 15-year high, making affordability a growing concern. For working-class Americans, the dream of owning a car is fading fast. Leasing used to be an alternative, but with fewer vehicles rolling off assembly lines, even the used market is tightening. Meanwhile, foreign automakers, particularly Chinese EV brands, are swooping in with cheaper alternatives, making the situation even more unpredictable for U.S. manufacturers. The U.S. auto industry isn't just a collection of corporations. It's an ecosystem of jobs factories and entire communities built around manufacturing hubs in Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky. But as production costs mount and exports to China dry up, the outlook is turning grim. Ford and GM have already begun scaling back investment in domestic production, while Stellantis has warned that extended trade restrictions could lead to plant closures. A single auto plant shutting down doesn't just impact factory workers. It sends shockwaves through steel mills, auto parts suppliers, and logistics networks. With China ramping up its domestic auto sector and exporting aggressively to Europe, U.S. manufacturers are being squeezed from both sides, losing international markets while facing soaring costs at home. If the doesn't step in with subsidies or policy shifts, Detroit could be looking at a devastating contraction. While U.S. automakers wrestle with tariffs, Chinese companies are expanding at an unprecedented pace. BYD, NIO, and XPeng aren't just building cars. They're developing self-sufficient supply chains that are vertically integrated from battery production to vehicle assembly. BYD recently surpassed Tesla as the world's largest EV manufacturer, and its cost-cutting strategy is making American brands look outdated. While GM and Ford struggle to lower production costs, BYD is slashing prices on its latest models, with some electric cars selling for as low as $11,000 in China. This isn't just a competitive shift. It's a fundamental realignment of the industry, where Chinese brands are outmaneuvering U.S. automakers, not just in China, but in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and even parts of Europe. The longer the U.S. remains dependent on China for battery production, the harder it will be to counter this growing dominance. The numbers are hard to ignore. China controls over 70% of the world's EV battery production and dominates lithium refining. The U.S., meanwhile, lags behind in almost every metric, with domestic battery production still in its infancy. Even with government incentives under the Inflation Reduction Act, scaling up to compete with China's supply chain mastery will take at least a decade. Automakers like Tesla and GM are trying to secure alternative supply routes, but China's grip on rare earth materials and battery technology keeps growing stronger. Beijing's aggressive push for EV infrastructure, consumer subsidies, and export dominance is widening the gap between the two nations. Unless the U.S. government takes drastic steps to subsidize battery manufacturing and domestic mining, American automakers may never regain the ground they've lost in the EV race. Tariffs are only one weapon in China's arsenal. Beijing has multiple levers of economic pressure, and if tensions escalate, it could take even more drastic action. One major possibility: restricting exports of rare earth minerals, which are crucial for the production of electric motors and batteries. China has already hinted at this move before. A similar strategy was deployed against Japan in 2010, sending prices skyrocketing overnight. If China chooses to weaponize its control over key materials, American automakers could be left scrambling for substitutes, adding billions in costs, and pushing EV prices even higher. Another potential move: undercutting American brands by flooding the global market with cheap Chinese EVs, effectively making it impossible for U.S. companies to compete on price. The bottom line: if Washington continues down this path of economic confrontation, Beijing still has cards to play, and the U.S. auto industry may not be ready for what's next. The stakes are higher than ever, and this isn't just about cars. It's about the survival of American manufacturing as a whole. Automobiles are one of the last major industries where the U.S. still holds global influence. But if China continues expanding its dominance in electric vehicles, batteries, and exports, the consequences will ripple beyond Detroit. Supply chain disruptions, rising production costs, and the loss of China as major export market could accelerate factory shutdowns across multiple industries from steel to semiconductors. With China aggressively pursuing trade deals with Europe, South America, and the Middle East, the U.S. risks losing leverage in global supply chains. If policymakers don't intervene with strategic industrial policies, the American auto industry could be facing its most existential threat in decades. And this time, the competition isn't playing by old rules. If Washington decides to double down, expect China to match every move with an equally aggressive countermeasure. Higher tariffs won't just hurt China. They'll also drive up costs for U.S. consumers and put more pressure on already struggling American automakers. If Trump or any future administration escalates trade restrictions, Beijing has options: more tariffs, supply chain cutoffs, or an all-out push to dominate global EV sales. The biggest losers: American workers and consumers, who will see fewer jobs, higher prices, and dwindling U.S. market influence. The winners: China's automakers, who are expanding worldwide while American brands retreat. If this economic war continues, it won't be just about trade. It will be about who controls the future of transportation itself. The U.S. auto industry is at a breaking point. If this trade war continues to spiral, we could be looking at a permanent realignment of the global automotive landscape. But what's the next move? Does Washington have a counter strategy? Or is this the moment when America's auto dominance truly begins to unravel?